Nathan Cole was a man used to marble floors, tailored suits, and boardroom negotiations, but on that damp Thursday evening, he slipped into a corner booth of a small roadside diner wearing nothing more than faded jeans, a plain gray jacket, and scuffed shoes that no one would suspect belonged to a millionaire. He had built his empire from the ground up, investing in restaurants that now stretched across the state, yet lately he felt suffocated by the polished smiles and practiced respect of people who only saw his money. Tonight was different. Tonight, he wanted to know how it felt to be just another face in the crowd, an ordinary man who could sit down and order dinner without recognition. The diner was nothing remarkable, linoleum floors slightly worn, neon lights buzzing faintly, the smell of frying oil lingering in the air, but it carried a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The waitress who came to his table caught his attention immediately. She was young, probably mid-20s, her blonde hair tied back hastily, dark circles under her eyes telling a story of sleepless nights, yet her smile was genuine, kind, and patient. Her name tag read Emma. She greeted him as though he mattered, not because of who he was, but simply because he was a customer. Nathan ordered the house steak and coffee, and she scribbled it down without judgment, though he noticed the tiny tremor in her hand as she held the pad. While waiting, he watched her move from table to table, checking on the elderly man in the corner booth as though he were her own family, refilling coffee mugs before anyone had to ask, crouching to comfort a small child fussing in his seat. Emma wasn't just working, she was pouring a piece of herself into every small act of service, despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Nathan felt something stir in him, a mix of admiration and curiosity, as though this woman carried a story deeper than her weary smile revealed. When she finally returned with his plate, the steak steaming and the coffee hot, she set it down with a polite nod, but before she stepped away, her hand slipped beneath the plate and left a small folded note tucked discreetly under its edge. She didn't linger, didn't even glance back at him, but Nathan's chest tightened as he stared at the paper, his fork forgotten halfway to his mouth. He had come here seeking anonymity, but what Emma had just done made his ordinary meal feel like the beginning of something extraordinary. Nathan's hand lingered over the folded paper, his curiosity warring with caution, and when he finally opened it, the hurried handwriting nearly made his breath catch. "Please, if you can help me, don't tell anyone. They'll fire me if they know I spoke up. I don't know who else to trust." It wasn't what he expected, no flirtation, no idle request, but a desperate plea that carried weight far heavier than the ink on the page. He looked up instinctively, scanning the diner, but Emma was already busy at another table, laughing softly with a child while setting down a plate of fries, her weary eyes betraying the effort behind her smile. Nathan studied her carefully, noticing details he had overlooked before, the worn soles of her shoes, the fraying threads on her apron, the way she carried herself with a quiet strength even as exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. He had encountered desperation in many forms throughout his business career, but rarely had it been delivered in such a raw, human way, hidden beneath the guise of routine service. When Emma returned to check on his food, he spoke in a low voice, careful not to draw attention. "I got your note," he said, his words measured. Her eyes widened for a split second, panic flickering across her face before she glanced around to ensure no one had overheard. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling, "not here. Not in front of them. Just, meet me outside when you're done. If you don't, I'll understand." She straightened quickly, plastering on the same polite smile as though nothing had passed between them, and moved on to another table without hesitation. Nathan sat frozen, his appetite gone, staring at the steak cooling on his plate, the note still clutched in his hand. He had come here tonight as an experiment, to disappear into the background, but instead he had stumbled into something real, something raw, and it pressed heavily on his conscience. By the time he paid the bill and stepped out into the drizzle-soaked night, the streetlights casting halos of gold against the wet pavement, Emma was there, leaning against the shadowed corner of the alley, clutching her thin coat around her as though it were armor. Her eyes met his, filled with fear but also a glimmer of fragile hope, and in that moment Nathan knew that whatever truth she carried was about to change the course of both their lives. The rain pattered softly on the pavement as Nathan stepped closer, his voice steady though his heart pounded with anticipation. Emma hesitated, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, then finally began to speak, her words pouring out like a dam breaking after years of silence. She told him about Carl, the diner's owner, a man who skimmed wages, stole tips meant for the staff, and threatened anyone who dared question him. Employees had quit in fear, others stayed only because jobs were scarce, but all endured the suffocating atmosphere of silence. Emma admitted she was one of the few who hadn't walked away because she couldn't afford to. Her younger brother, only 17, was sick and in need of medication she barely managed to buy with her meager paycheck. "I don't care about myself," she said, her voice shaking, "but I can't keep watching him get worse while the money I work for disappears into Carl's pocket. If I lose this job, he'll fire me with nothing, and my brother will have nothing either." Her eyes glistened under the weak glow of the streetlight, a mixture of fear and defiance, and Nathan felt a surge of anger rise within him, not at her plight but at the injustice she was forced to carry. He had seen corporate greed and dishonesty countless times, but this was personal, raw, and unforgivable. He wanted to tell her then and there who he was, that he wasn't just a stranger in the shadows but a man with enough power to end Carl's reign with a single signature, but he bit back the words. If he revealed himself too soon, she might think he was just another man offering promises he could easily abandon. Instead, he steadied his voice and told her simply, "I'll help you, Emma. But I need you to trust me." She blinked at him, disbelief flashing across her face, then whispered, "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Nathan's jaw tightened, his eyes meeting hers with quiet conviction. "Because people like you don't deserve to suffer in silence. Sometimes it just takes one voice, one act of courage, to change everything." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the rhythm of the rain, and then Emma nodded, her tears slipping freely now, as though she was allowing herself for the first time to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally willing to stand beside her. 2 weeks later, tension crackled through the diner like static in the air as Carl paced in front of the staff he had gathered after hours, his face red with rage over a surprise inspection he hadn't seen coming, barking threats about firing anyone he suspected of talking to outsiders. The employees stood silent, their fear palpable, until the diner's front door opened and Nathan walked in, not in his worn jeans and jacket this time, but in a crisp navy suit that seemed to command the room with every step. Conversations halted, heads turned, and Carl sputtered in confusion, his bluster faltering as Nathan strode confidently to the center of the room. "My name is Nathan Cole," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority, "and as of this morning, I am the new owner of this diner. Effective immediately, Carl is no longer in charge." Gasps rippled across the room as Carl shouted in protest, but Nathan silenced him by holding up a folder of documents, financial records, proof of stolen wages, and evidence of his corruption that Nathan's team had gathered in days. Security officers waiting by the door stepped forward, escorting Carl out despite his furious curses, and the moment the door slammed shut behind him, the air in the diner shifted, the oppressive weight of fear lifting like clouds parting after a storm. The staff stood in stunned silence until Emma, still in her apron, brought her trembling hand to her mouth, her wide eyes locked on Nathan as realization washed over her. He turned to her with a gentler expression, his tone softening. "Emma, it was your courage that made this possible. Without your voice, none of this would have come to light. From now on, your tips are yours, your wages are fair, and this place will be run with honesty and respect." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, her relief mixing with disbelief as the other employees cheered, some embracing each other, others simply crying from the sudden release of fear. Nathan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Your brother will get the help he needs, I'll make sure of it. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Emma's lips trembled as she whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." Nathan smiled, a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. "You already did, when you slipped me that note."